I want to take a second to show you some shocking data. It is from last year, and it shows how young men are breaking conservative broadly in a range of countries.
Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Today I want to talk about this video put out by the Canadian progressive YouTuber Steve Boots discussing the topic of why young men are starting to vote conservative all around the West. It's a great case study because at the same time he's trying to understand and explain why young men are starting to move in this way politically. He completely misses the point. In fact, in a strange way, Steve Boots misses the point so hard he comes all the way back around and perfectly models why young men do not want to vote for parties like the NDP that Steve Boots frequently stumps for. Just check out this clip right here.
So the question we need to ask is, why is this happening? And I want to be really clear before we start here. This is not about coddling or making excuses for young men. What I'm asking folks to do is to look at the systems and circumstances that are pushing young men in those directions.
The man is such a progressive zealot that even in this video entitled "Why Are Men Voting Conservative?", he cannot acknowledge that men may actually have some good points. He has to give a disclaimer to his audience that no, I'm not coddling or making any excuses for these young men. I'm just also wanting to blame institutions and systems for having contributed to their corruption. It's a video where he doesn't actually care why young men are voting conservative. He just doesn't like that they're not voting for the left. That is really the thesis of this video. Young men should be voting left. Why are they not voting left? Not, do young men have legitimate reasons for voting conservative? He frames it all as they're doing something wrong. Let's figure out why they're doing something wrong.
Because I think we need to be able to think with a little more depth than just men are evil.
That clip really made me laugh because Steve Boots is trying to define himself as a reasonable moderate in this conversation because he doesn't think that young men are evil. Wow, what a consolation prize for young men that Steve here doesn't think they're evil. Although in the previous clip of Steve talking that I just showed, he was framing young men as the villains, which is why he is not going to coddle or make excuses for them.
Because while there are indeed evil men out there, there are evil people of all genders, and simply being a man does not make someone, by definition, evil. So what is actually going on here? Because a lot of it comes down to belief around traditional roles, and gender roles in particular, but it also includes things like beliefs around authority. Young men have grown increasingly authoritarian.
Oh, absolutely, Steve. Young men are growing increasingly authoritarian, and that's why they're voting for conservative parties that want to do dangerous authoritarian things like cut taxes, reduce regulations, cut funding to wasteful government programs, make it easier to get a gun license. You know, things like that would be right at home in Nazi Germany or fascist Italy. This is all rather ridiculous coming from Steve Boots, a big government supporting socialist who has endorsed hate speech laws. He just defines authoritarianism as being whatever he doesn't support. So if young men want smaller government, that by definition is authoritarian because Steve Boots wants big government. He does include an asinine example where he cites a poll where 25% of young men in the United States would support the president having powers unrestrained by Congress. But that's more just political naivete of younger people being frustrated that things the president's doing that they like can be blocked by Congress. That's just a feature of the American system that people eventually learn about and accept.
For starters, we need to ask, where do the expectations and beliefs that young men hold come from? Because they don't just blow in on the wind. They are taught, they are pushed into young people from an early age, and online ecosystems just exasperate it. It's not just from parents, although a very large portion of it's from parents. One of the bigger determinants in a young man's attitude and behavior is his relationship with his father, or a trusted male adult figure. Positive male role models lead to positive behavior.
Now, he's just done a few things here that are kind of odd. He implies that young men are learning conservatism from like school or growing up, when in fact in schools today you tend to have more of a left-wing narrative taught when it comes to social studies and other social issues. So really it's that younger men are rejecting what is being taught in schools, and then he moves on to talking about positive male role models and father figures. He implies as if you should be coming out as a leftist if you had a positive relationship with your father or male role model. It's absolutely insane because the stereotype tends to be the other way around, that if you don't like your dad, you may become a resentful leftist. Not that's actually how it works, but the stereotype is that way sort of for a reason.
But there is a shortage of positive online male role models. Look online. If you were a young man in particular spending time online, where would you likely spend that time? Roblox? Fortnite? YouTube? YouTube is absolutely packed with male-centric content that reinforces traditional ideals. Stuff like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and Theo Von. A lot of these incredibly widely viewed YouTube accounts are embracing a much more traditional view of masculinity and of society in general. And this shows up in the statistics. Young men are broadly less and less feminist and more embracing of traditional, often exploitative gender roles.
He just implies that traditional values and gender roles are inherently bad, and that men should want to identify as feminists because he highlights it as an issue that they don't want to identify as feminists anymore. And he's about to bring up a chart that I think actually just hurts his own point because it demonstrates many women also agree with those same men.
17% of overall people under the age of 35 believe that a man who stays home to care for his children is less of a man, according to a recent Ipsos survey. But when you break it out into men versus women, 26% of men under the age of 35 believe that, compared to 10% of women. And only 41% of young men identify themselves as feminists. So where are these beliefs coming from?
Now let's just quickly over and pull the parking brake and look at this chart a little bit more in detail. Look at the women under 35 side of the chart and look at the question, I define myself as a feminist. Now, this is a question that obviously should get more women to agree because it's basically saying, you're a woman, are you pro-woman? That's how a lot of people will think about it, even though that's not really what being a feminist means. Even for that question, there were 38% of women who didn't agree. Perhaps someone like Steve Boots would claim those women are just experiencing internalized misogyny, or maybe they also can see what many young men see as being the flaw with feminist culture right now.
And there's a bunch of part of it, but one of the biggest reasons is that people cling on to tradition in uncertainty. When people are scared, when people don't know what life or the future holds for them, often they will hold on to tradition, hold on to the old ways of doing things because it gives them a sense of stability and control.
Again, he just talks about tradition that way without actually explaining why it's bad.
And I think young people in general, but young men in particular, feel a lack of control over their lives. They are told from a very early age that their role is the provider, the source of strength and stability. And if they don't feel like they can do that, it creates a lot of internal turmoil. But at the same time, they aren't really being given the tools or the supports in order to manage that or to unpack those beliefs or feelings.
This whole video, and especially the next sections, is just Steve Boots belittling the problems of younger men and acting like it's just a social problem. Like he just needs to be able to sit young men down so that he can unpack all of their issues, explain to them concisely why they're all wrong, and so that they can realize that they should just fall in line and that everything is actually totally okay in the new progressive world. Obviously it's not. Just look at the unemployment rate of younger men. He will eventually talk about job market problems and the housing market and other stuff like that, but he kind of just skims past it like, I understand there's issues out there, but don't take it out on the current system. Right now, if you're 15 to 24 and male, you have a 15% unemployment rate in Canada. If you're going to university and you're a student, your unemployment rate is 20%. And remember, the unemployment rate is only calculating those actually looking for work. It's not including people who don't want a job and don't have one. Those are people trying to find a job. 20% of them cannot find one. That is unprecedented.
And so when you have online pundits or even political leaders who are speaking directly to young men and saying that they understand their concerns and offering simple answers, whether those answers are valid or not, they tend to listen. And that's what's happening. The online manosphere is colossal and a license to print money. And this is where politics comes into it. Right now, conservatives are the group that are speaking the most directly to young men.
This is where Steve Boots, I think, is just making a wrong assumption. An assumption I see a lot of people in politics make, that because conservatives are capturing the young male vote, that must mean the conservatives are speaking to young men and the liberals, the NDP, and the Greens are not. No, it's that younger men like the answers that the conservatives had. Every party tries to win every demographic of voter. They all try and speak to them. The problem for the NDP and the Liberals is that young men don't want more government in their lives. They don't want higher taxes to pay for more social programs, subsidies, government jobs. They want to have their own adventure in life where they start their own business or they go find work in the private sector. They have their own home. They don't want government housing. They want their own housing they buy with their own money. This is a difference in temperament between men and women. Women are more likely to vote for security, where men are more likely to want to take risks in life and have there be more freedom for them to operate as they want. The NDP and the Liberals don't offer that. That's why the Conservatives do so well with young men, because they do offer that.
Then they go online and they're offered easy scapegoats. They're told to blame feminism and wokeness and Trudeau and the libs and everybody. They are offered simple solutions, and so they take them.
Okay, I'm sorry, are men not allowed to take issue with hyper-progressive feminist culture? Even 38% of women we just saw do not define themselves as feminist. Are men not allowed to take issue with the liberals' big government policies that have definitely not empowered them in the market or made their lives better? And apparently we're also not allowed to believe that simple solutions exist, because I guess that's just a simplistic, dumb way of thinking. I can come up with lots of simple solutions for young men. Cut taxes is one of them. You will immediately make the economy freer and give them way more opportunities. But again, Steve Boots sees those as illegitimate answers because he's a leftist and supports leftist policies. This entire video is just a way of trying to pitch leftism as the solution to men's problems, which in itself is simplistic, but he doesn't see it as simplistic because he's a leftist, and leftist ideology is super, super intellectual.
They are living in systems that they didn't build and that in many ways they are victims of. But because in many cases men are the architects of these systems, they're told that they bear the blame and the responsibility. But men are not only the architects of these systems, they are also the victims.
And from here on in the video, Steve Boots pretends to care about the problems of young men by bringing things up like the suicide rate and substance abuse, but up to this point, he has just been belittling the things that many young men who now vote conservative take issue with, because again, unless it's a leftist solution, he doesn't actually see it as a real solution. And these people wonder why younger men don't want to vote for their parties. They won't even acknowledge their problems, but they think that they should still listen to their solutions for the problems that they belittle and pretend are not real problems. One more thing I want to bring up that wasn't specific to this video is that a lot of young men are also starting to vote conservative because they don't want to be like people like Steve Boots. Young men do not like this leftist millennial loser culture where you dress up like you don't really care, you act sort of whiny and snide all the time. There's a reason why younger men look up to fictional characters who are more masculine, who wear suits or are more physically fit. That's actually becoming cool again, where it was seen as very passé in the 2000s and 2010s because that's the typical Western thing to idolize, but why don't we idolize alternative things that are anti-Western or are very outside of the mainstream? The problem is that became the mainstream, this loser culture where you just act like you don't care, everything sucks, our history sucks, our country sucks, and we should have to transform it and turn it into something that it's not. Young men don't like that garbage. And now, to put a cap on this video, I want to leave you with a video of Steve Boots freaking out over an interview where Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, stated that he only believes in two genders. And by the way, if you like my political coverage and you've liked this video, make sure to leave a like on it, subscribe to the channel if you are not yet a subscriber, and leave a comment on what you think about the topic of the day. See you guys later.
Affordable food, gas, and homes in safe neighborhoods.
Again, the question was about passports.
That's the promise we need for Canadians. If Liberals want to talk about different labels.
The Liberals don't want to talk about it. Trump does. He banned their existence. What do you want here?